Okay, I'm making this video to show how to install the Sigurd Max short stroke trigger on the LCP Max from Galloway Precision. They've got a very good tutorial on their site, but the gunsmith does move kind of quickly. So if you're not real familiar with firearms, it can be kind of confusing. So what I've decided to do, since I'm going to install it, I'm going to break this video down into just sections so you don't have to watch me taking it all apart. And then we'll put it together and hopefully it'll help you out some. I'm going to start with assuming you already know how to field strip your weapon and take the slide off and move the pin out, because we're only going to be working on the lower part. So that'll be the first thing we do. Get your slide off, get it ready to go, and then we'll go into this section number 2. Something that will be helpful to you, if you'll pull a schematic of the LCP Max out. I got this just doing a Google search. I don't remember the exact location, but it'll be easy to find. And that just helps you identify the pins that they're speaking about and in their locations in relation to the trigger. So I think having the PDF version of this expanded on your computer like I do will definitely be helpful as you go along. Okay, the next item we want to do is we want to remove the inner and outer pin out of the stock trigger. They recommend using a 1/16 punch. Don't know if you can read that or not, but it's a 1/16. I have my own version of a block, and just going to set that on there and punch that out. And so that comes completely out, and there it is. So we'll save that. And the next thing, you just want to pop that back in, and really you just put a little pressure on the detent and pull it out. What you can see, if you've never done it before, it's just a bendable piece of plastic that latches on. So when you slap it back in, you hear it kind of click, and then just push it out and it comes out. And so that's the next phase. Okay, and the next thing we're going to do while we have it on the block is we're going to take out the front frame pin. Again, just tap that out. And I like to keep my parts in something I can clearly see, so I just use a little PVC white cap that really contrasts with what you're putting in there so you don't lose parts. Then, of course, now we'll take out this spring. It comes out. Again, drop it in the bucket. And so that's kind of the next phase. Okay, now we're ready to push it through and pull out the frame assembly. They do caution you to kind of keep your fingers on each side of it so you don't pop parts off that you didn't mean to. Let's see here. This is okay, and that all comes out, and so far nothing has popped out, so we're good to go there. Okay, not sure if it showed as I was pulling the assembly out, but the inner trigger fell out, of course, because we had already knocked the pin out, and then the inner trigger spring also came out also. So that is part of the old trigger, which obviously we're not going to reuse because the Sigurd trigger already comes pre-installed. The spring's in there, the inner trigger's in there, so it's all one piece unit. So those did fall out if you weren't familiar with it, and you may have panicked and realized that's just all it is. It was part of the stock trigger that we're, of course, not going to use. So these parts will not be used again. Okay, now that we have the receiver out, again, keeping both sides pinched, we're going to remove the trigger bar, and that will in turn release pressure on the trigger spring. So really you can just kind of pry it up a little bit and just watch that spring. So that comes out, and there is releasing on the spring. And here in this video where I think it got a little bit confusing, because the trigger pivot pin, which if you can see the top of that, I don't know if it'll show up on the video, has to be tapped out. Then of course now there's the bottom of it. So he's tapping that trigger pin out in order to get the trigger spring out, because that's what that pin is, what holds the spring in. So I hope that shows on the video. Okay, I was trying to do my best to show this on video, but of course I'm creating a shadow, and I'm working on a black gun. Of course I replace a black trigger, but you're pushing the pin through, which relieves the tension off the trigger spring. And then now you can flip it over and you can push that out and remove the old trigger, and then install the new trigger. So that's how we are so far. Okay, another area on the video that I think was confusing people is after they pull the trigger back in and put the spring in, you saw him doing a lot of pushing with this punch, and you may have been confused, well, what is he doing? Really, he's just making sure everything's lined up, because it is, again, that that trigger spring needs to sit flat, because the trigger pivot pin will push through there, and that's what's going to hold it into place. So when he slid that in there and was kind of telling you about that, the orientation, that just makes sure it's flat. And then just running the punch through then there again was just lining up the holes. That's all it was. So now it does get kind of tricky, because now you've got to try to drop the pin back in. And again, I'm going to try to hold a flashlight so you can see this. I'm not sure how it'll work out, but we'll give it a shot, because it is a little tricky. Okay, we've got it in there, and it is a little tricky. Forgive my shaking. I have way too much coffee this morning. So now we've got the trigger pivot pin back in that's holding the spring. So now we'll move on to the next step. Okay, so now we're ready to put our trigger bar back in. As they suggested, I did put a little bit of lube on there. Not a whole lot, but just a little bit. The gun is fairly new and wasn't that bad. When you do the spring tensioning, make sure you don't make the mistake of just slapping back in there like so. The spring needs to go all the way around counterclockwise to give it enough tension. So it is a little bit of a trick to, if you can catch it under your fingernail, you can usually do enough that, there you go, set it in there. So if you put it clockwise, without going all the way counterclockwise, you just won't have enough tension. You'll know it right off the bat. You won't have any, it'll be just so sloppy. So now we've got it all back together. Again, they recommend pinching it so you don't drop stuff. And we're ready to drop it back in there. There we go. And drop it back into place. And replace the pin. Alrighty. Okay, got that put back in. And oops, put the cap in correctly, dum-dum. Okay, we've got it all put back together. I guess you can call it function check. I like to first see if I can pull the trigger without the safety bar. I can't, so that's good. Pull the trigger. Honestly, I don't, my gripe was the shooting it so much I was getting the blister. As far as the feel, it does seem to be a little bit less travel, which is nice. And I don't seem to get my finger, on the older trigger, I'd get the fat of my finger underneath there after shooting a while, and that would cause a blister. So online, somebody that put this in there said, well, this will absolutely cure the blister. So I'll try to get out to the range as soon as I can, and if it works, I'll do an update. But anyway, I hope the video was helpful to you. Please watch the Galloway videos. Like I say, give these gunsmiths a break. They must do hundreds of these each week, and I just can't imagine them trying to slow it down. But anyhow, I hope it helped. It seems to be better, but I'll test it and find out. Thanks, guys.